That's what I heard echoing from the phone speaker not 20 feet from where I stood, holding a bright yellow plastic slide like it was some kind of contraband weapon. My 6-year-old daughter Emma was clinging to my leg, her big hazel eyes wide with confusion and fear. We had just arrived at our new lake cabin, not a permanent residence, but a quiet weekend retreat I'd been saving up for over 2 years. I wanted this to be a place of peace. A place where Emma and I could unplug, breathe easy, and build memories away from the buzzing stress of the city. What I hadn't expected was to be greeted by a woman who apparently thought she was the sheriff of suburbia, waging war against playground equipment. Let me rewind about 20 minutes and walk you through how this spiral of absurdity began. Emma and I had pulled into the gravel driveway of our small, cedar-shingled lake house with the kind of energy only a child can bring. She bounced out of the car the moment I turned off the ignition, arms flapping with excitement, already pointing out where she wanted to place her play zone. Her slide, a sunny, plastic thing we'd found on sale at a local hardware store, was her prized possession. It wasn't massive or complicated. No sharp metal parts, no towering heights. Just a simple incline mold from safe, durable plastic that fit perfectly into a backyard. Nothing more, nothing less. She wanted it set up near the big sycamore tree, right where the sun filtered through the branches in golden stripes. That way I can slide down into the sunshine, she giggled. As I hoisted the lightweight slide and made my way through the front gate toward the backyard, that's when I first saw her. She emerged from the sidewalk like some kind of HOA apparition. Clipboard in hand, fanny pack bristling with tools like she was going to perform surgery on my landscaping. Her stride was military. Her polo shirt tucked in so tightly that I half expected it to cut off her circulation. A laminated name badge with Marina Blackwell, Pine Lake HOA president, glinted in the sunlight. And her expression, a combination of grim authority and suppressed glee, made it clear she'd been waiting for a moment like this. "Stop right there," she barked. I did. Out of surprise, mostly. I thought maybe she was trying to warn me about something, rattlesnakes, broken glass, whatever. But no. She marched straight up to me, nostrils flaring like a cartoon bull, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the slide in my hands. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I blinked. "Setting up a slide. For my daughter." "This is a violation," she snapped, like I'd just been caught dumping toxic waste on federal land. "Playground equipment requires an architectural review and written approval from the Pine Lake Community Standards Board." She said this with the seriousness of someone delivering a verdict in a murder trial. Emma peeked out from behind my knee, sensing the tension. Her hand slipped into mine and tightened. My gut twisted. "It's just a plastic slide," I said calmly. "For a 6-year-old. It's not permanent. I'm literally setting it on the grass." "That's irrelevant," Marina said, her tone cold and precise. "The colors are not within the approved aesthetic palette. Yellow isn't a permitted exterior accent unless it conforms to tones pre-approved by the board." She said board like it was some sacred institution, a holy order of robe-wearing property clerics. I glanced around. No one else seemed to be outside, but I noticed curtains shift. Eyes watching from windows. The way people do when a neighbor's having a bad day, but they don't want to be part of the cleanup. Now, I'm a software developer. My life is full of rules and logic and systems. I don't mind authority, if it makes sense. If it's documented. If it's real. And when someone pulls rank on me without backup, I start asking questions. "Can I see these rules in writing?" I asked, setting the slide gently on the grass so Emma wouldn't be scared. "If there are guidelines that apply to this kind of thing, I'd be happy to review them." That's when Marina's expression cracked. Just slightly. Her lips twitched. Her pupils narrowed. And I knew, instantly, that I'd hit a nerve. "The rules are community expectations," she said sharply. "I don't carry printed bylaws around with me." "Then how do you enforce them?" I asked. "Because that sounds a lot like personal opinion, not regulation." Boom. That was it. Her face flushed red. Not out of embarrassment, no, this was anger. Pure, roiling, affronted fury that someone had dared to challenge her assumed dominion. Without another word, she yanked out her phone and, with exaggerated dramatics, dialed 911. "I'm reporting a community safety violation," she said into the phone, making sure to project her voice for the invisible peanut gallery. "Yes. A man is installing unapproved playground equipment. Children's lives are in danger. This is an active threat." Emma tugged at my arm. "Daddy," she whispered, "why is she calling the police? Did I do something bad?" That was the moment everything shifted for me. Up until then, I'd been annoyed, confused, maybe even mildly amused. But now? Now I was angry. Because this wasn't about an HOA policy or even a misunderstanding. This was a woman weaponizing authority to humiliate and control, and doing it so loudly that she was scaring my child in the process. I pulled out my own phone and hit record. If things were going sideways, I wanted evidence. And sure enough, Marina was painting the plastic slide like it was a piece of heavy construction equipment capable of leveling property values with a single squeak. It's unauthorized. Unsafe. Bright colors lower property appeal. He refuses to remove it. It's destruction of visual harmony. Visual harmony. The 911 dispatcher must have been confused. The cops showed up 10 minutes later. Just one cruiser. The officer, a younger guy with a buzz cut and a tired expression, stepped out and took one look at the slide, then at me, then at Marina. His brows furrowed. He said slowly, this appears to be a standard plastic slide for a child. Marina launched into her speech again, now waving her clipboard like it was the Constitution. This is a serious breach of community conduct. This man refused to comply with verbal warnings. He's threatening the character of our neighborhood. The officer cut her off. Do you have documentation? Bylaws, anything I can look at? And now Marina faltered. I don't carry the full charter with me, she said, voice wobbling. But you're the president, the officer replied. Shouldn't you have access to the rules you're enforcing? She tried again. They're implied expectations. The officer turned to me, asked for ID and proof of ownership. I showed him the deed, complete with parcel number and my name on the title. He nodded, looked back at Marina. He said, this time more firmly, filing a false emergency report is a criminal offense. This appears to be a civil disagreement, not a public safety emergency. Please refrain from using emergency services for non-emergency issues. She sputtered. But this is going to set a precedent. And then she stormed off, muttering about legal action and community disruption, and taking this to the board. Emma and I stood there in silence for a moment. Then she looked up at me, eyes still wide. Daddy, she asked again, why did that lady call the police on us? I knelt down, hugged her tight. Because some people forget what matters, sweetheart, I said. But I promise you, we're going to be okay. And I'm going to find out exactly what's going on here. Later that night, after Emma fell asleep curled up in her new sleeping bag under her twinkle lights, I opened my laptop and started digging. I wanted to understand who exactly Marina Blackwell was, and what kind of HOA she was running. Because something didn't sit right. Not with her panic when I asked for documents. Not with the oversized house she lived in. And definitely not with the way no one else in the neighborhood came outside to say a word. They were afraid. Or complicit. Or both. But I'm not either of those things. I'm a problem solver. And this time, the problem wasn't software. It was something a lot more human, and a lot more dangerous. Type red flag, if you've ever had to deal with a self-appointed authority figure who crumbled the moment you asked for proof. Because the deeper I dig into this HOA, the clearer it becomes. The slide was just the beginning. By the time I sat down in front of my laptop that night, the sun had long since disappeared behind the hills surrounding Pine Lake, and the cabin was quiet save for the rhythmic tick of the ceiling fan and the occasional soft rustle of Emma turning in her sleep. I was still wound tight from everything that had happened, my brain firing like a server caught in a recursive loop. But I knew exactly what to do. As a software developer, I've gotten good at digging into data, connecting disparate pieces of information, and spotting patterns others might miss. Debugging broken systems is what I do for a living. And from everything I'd seen, this place, this HOA, was more broken than anything I'd ever been paid to fix. I started with what should have been the simplest question: was the Pine Lake HOA even real? The official website came up in seconds. At first glance, it looked legitimate enough. A minimalist logo in soft forest greens, a few aspirational photos of kayaks on the lake, families smiling under gazebos, the kind of imagery marketing departments love to slap on every community-focused landing page. But right away, I noticed something strange. The last update on the homepage was from 2019. The recent news tab led to a blank page. The upcoming events calendar was frozen in time, still listing a holiday potluck that had supposedly taken place over 4 years ago. I dug into the board members section. That's when my stomach dropped. The listed names meant nothing to me, not a single person I'd seen in the neighborhood. No contact numbers. No emails. No photos. Just a few formal-sounding titles like Community Chair and Vice President of Aesthetics. It felt like opening a door labeled Staff Only and finding a brick wall behind it. It got worse. The Meeting Minutes Archive, something every functioning HOA should be legally keeping and publishing, hadn't been updated since early 2020. There was no record of any board meetings, no votes, no budget approvals. Nothing that showed any kind of operational structure. That was my first red flag. But it wouldn't be the last. Switching gears, I opened the county records database. This was where things really started getting concerning. I used Emma's tablet to keep the violation notice open in front of me as a reference while I cross-referenced Pine Lake HOA's supposed governance with official filings. After about 20 minutes of digging through public records, I found exactly what I hoped I wouldn't: absolutely nothing. No election filings since 2020. No annual reports. No updated list of board officers. No financial disclosures, no registered bylaws. It was like looking at the digital footprint of a town that had once existed and then simply disappeared. Except, somehow, the phones were still ringing, and someone was still acting like they were in charge. It was surreal. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen for a long moment. The realization began to sink in, slow and chilling. The Pine Lake HOA, at least as it had been legally established, no longer existed. Marina Blackwell wasn't running a homeowners association. She was impersonating one. The next morning, just as the weight of that discovery had settled in, I got my first real taste of how far Marina was willing to go to keep up appearances. Emma and I were halfway through breakfast, pancakes and strawberries, her favorite, when a knock sounded at the front door. I opened it and immediately spotted something tucked tightly into the doorframe. A thick, professionally printed notice on heavy cardstock. At the top, in bold block font, were the words, Pine Lake Community Standards Board, Official Notice of Violation. I read it twice to be sure I wasn't imagining things. It claimed that I was in breach of Pine Lake aesthetic regulations for the unauthorized installation of colorful playground equipment. A fine of $300 was listed, with a deadline to comply within 72 hours. Failure to do so, the notice warned, would result in escalated enforcement action. There was no name at the bottom. No signature. No return address. No contact number for appeals. No citation of a specific clause or rule. Just threats dressed in the costume of officialdom. All sizzle, no steak. Emma saw my expression and wandered over. When she caught sight of the notice in my hand, her brow furrowed. "Am I in trouble, Daddy?" she asked, her little voice quivering. "Is my slide really bad?" I crouched beside her and took both of her hands in mine. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you haven't done anything wrong. Your slide is perfect. Some grown-ups make rules that don't make sense, but that doesn't mean you're in trouble. Okay?" She nodded slowly. But I could already see the toll the situation was taking. My bright, fearless daughter, who used to run barefoot into the yard like it was her personal kingdom, now lingered near the windows, peeking through the blinds before stepping outside. If she saw an adult, she'd retreat. Her joy, her sense of safety, had been replaced by suspicion. This wasn't about a slide anymore. This was about power. Control. Fear. That afternoon, while Emma was reading quietly in her room, I went to check the mailbox and found myself face to face with a neighbor I hadn't yet met. She looked nervous, glancing around as if someone might be watching. "You're the new family, right?" she asked in a hushed tone. I nodded. "Yeah. Just moved in." She stepped closer. "I'm Rachel Williams. I live 3 houses down. I saw what happened with Marina yesterday." I could tell right away she wasn't just making conversation. Her expression was tight, cautious, the look of someone who'd been burned before. "She's been tormenting families in this neighborhood for over a year now," Rachel whispered. "I wanted to warn you." I listened as she told me her own story. Her son, just 8, had drawn a few dinosaurs on the sidewalk in chalk one afternoon. The next day, she'd received a violation notice. "Unauthorized artistic expression," it said. She showed me photos on her phone, bright stegosauruses and a crooked, grinning T-Rex. Harmless. Joyful. And apparently a threat to visual uniformity. That's when it clicked. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. "She targets families," Rachel said quietly. "Especially ones with young kids. I've paid over $1,500 in so-called HOA fees the past 18 months. I was afraid not to. I didn't know what she might do." But there was more. Rachel pointed out that despite everyone paying fees, nothing in the neighborhood was ever maintained. The common areas were overgrown. The benches near the lake were falling apart. The community gazebo looked like it hadn't been painted in a decade. So where was all that money going? Rachel showed me violation letters she'd kept. All followed the same formula, official-looking fonts and letterhead, but no actual legal structure. No appeals. No accountability. That night, I drove into town and walked into the county courthouse with one goal: to pull every public record I could find on the Pine Lake HOA. What I found shocked me. According to official records, Pine Lake HOA had been properly incorporated in 2015, complete with a board and formal charter. But the most recent filing on record was from 2020. And then, a final entry dated December 2021, dissolution due to inactivity and insufficient board participation. It was done. Legally terminated. Gone. For over 2 years, Marina had been pretending to operate a governing body that no longer existed. But the most damning evidence came when I filed a public information request with the county for bank records associated with Pine Lake HOA's business account. Through those, I discovered that a new account had been opened in 2022, Pine Lake HOA Community Fund, with Marina Blackwell listed as the sole signatory. No co-signers. No board oversight. No registered audits. Nothing. Over the past 2 years, this account had collected more than $63,000 in fees from residents. And of that, not a single penny had been spent on community upkeep. Instead, the statement showed a clear pattern of personal expenses: mortgage payments on Marina's lavish home, monthly car lease transfers, out-of-state hotel stays, even purchases at high-end retail stores and spas. This wasn't incompetence. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, premeditated financial fraud. Marina hadn't just bullied residents. She'd conned them. And she'd just made the mistake of targeting the wrong person, someone who knew how to track data, follow trails, and build airtight timelines. I looked over at Emma's little plastic slide still standing proudly under the sycamore tree. That bogus $300 fine notice was still taped to our fridge. And I knew what I had to do next. I documented everything. Screenshots, financial records, timelines, past communications, legal filings, Rachel's testimony. I created a comprehensive dossier and saved it in 3 separate cloud locations, printed 2 copies, and backed it all up on an external drive. Because I had a feeling this wasn't going to end quietly. Sure enough, a few days later, Marina sent out an emergency community meeting notice to all Pine Lake residents. She titled it, "Restoring Order to Pine Lake." Classic authoritarian language. Fear-mongering. Vagueness. And above all, a power play. That Tuesday, I walked into the crowded community center with my file in hand and a calm, focused rage boiling just under the surface. Because now I had the truth. And Marina Blackwell had no idea what was coming next. People looked nervous. You could feel it before a word was spoken, this electric current of unease that rippled through the folding chairs and polite murmurs. Some residents were fidgeting in their seats, gripping the edges like they were bracing for impact. Others exchanged glances heavy with dread, as if they knew something awful was about to unfold but couldn't look away. A few looked outright terrified, eyes wide and bodies tense, the way people do when they expect to witness something brutal and irreversible. And then there were the ones who looked like they had come for blood, smirking faintly, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Not sympathy. Not curiosity. Just that hunger people get when they think they're about to see someone humiliated in public. I knew whose head they expected on the chopping block. Mine. Across the room, I spotted Rachel, one of the few people I still trusted in the neighborhood. She gave me a small, encouraging nod, her face set in that brave expression people wear when they're trying not to show fear. I appreciated it, but even she looked worried. Deeply, quietly worried. And she had reason to be. The majority of attendees didn't look like they came to support me. They looked like spectators at a public execution, here to witness the final blow in what they assumed was a losing battle. Marina had spared no effort in staging this showdown like a grand theatrical performance. The community center room had been rearranged with precision. A microphone stood prominently at the front, flanked by 2 easels bearing charts and official-looking paperwork. A table covered in neatly stacked documents sat beside it, arranged like exhibits at a trial. And there she stood, Marina, dressed to impress and intimidate. Her suit was sharply tailored, a deep navy blue with silver buttons that caught the overhead lights. It probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments, and she wore it like armor. Her makeup was flawless, her expression the exact blend of confidence and disdain she'd perfected over the years. She tapped the microphone once and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth and commanding, with that cultivated tone of self-importance. The voice of someone who'd spent years being obeyed without question. "We are gathered tonight because our community, our home, is under threat." You'd think someone had declared war on the neighborhood by the way she said it. She turned slightly, raising her hand with a dramatic flourish to gesture directly at me. Her eyes narrowed just enough to communicate to everyone that I was the threat in question. "Certain residents," she continued, voice now colder, "have chosen to ignore the established standards we all agreed upon when we moved here. They believe the rules don't apply to them. That they are above the community." I sat still. Not speaking. Not reacting. Letting her dig the hole deeper. "The Thompson family has refused to comply with basic community guidelines," she went on, her words sharpened to daggers. "And their defiance threatens everything we've worked so hard to build at Pine Lake." She made it sound like my daughter's backyard slide was the opening act of the apocalypse. You'd think we'd installed a missile silo. I continued to watch as she delivered her speech with the smug confidence of someone who had already declared herself the winner. She paced slightly behind the microphone, hands clasped and movements choreographed for maximum authority. "As your elected HOA president for the past 4 years," she said, making sure to emphasize elected with a dramatic pause, "I have worked tirelessly to maintain the integrity, value, and standards of our community." And then came the mistake. The fatal, beautiful mistake. She got specific. "Today it's a slide. Tomorrow, pink houses. Rusted cars on front lawns. Children running wild without supervision. That's what happens when there's no structure. No order." Each sentence was delivered like a judge banging a gavel. Each pause was rehearsed. She sounded less like a community leader and more like a suburban dictator delivering a monologue about the end of civilization. I looked around the room. A few faces still nodded along, loyal to the bitter end. But others were beginning to squirm. You could see the discomfort blooming on their faces, subtle at first, tightened lips, lowered eyes, hesitant glances at their neighbors. Marina's sermon was starting to sound less like leadership and more like obsession. And for a split second, I wavered. I'll admit it. I had a moment where I seriously questioned everything. Sitting there, folder in my lap, heart pounding, surrounded by people who were either indifferent or hostile, I felt a cold doubt creep into my mind. What if I was wrong? What if I'd misunderstood the documents? What if Marina really did have the authority she claimed? What if, by challenging her, I wasn't protecting the community, I was dooming myself and my daughter to even more isolation and hostility? Fear doesn't care about facts. It doesn't care about paperwork, signatures, or seals. It crawls in and fogs everything. For a few terrifying seconds, I considered folding. Apologizing. Paying the fine. Letting it go. And then I remembered Emma. Her face when she asked why she couldn't have a slide like the kids in the next town over. Her confusion, her disappointment. That tiny crack in her joy that I couldn't explain away. I remembered the way she traced the catalog picture with her finger, saying softly, "It's just for me and the stars." And just like that, the doubt vanished. This wasn't about property codes anymore. It was about dignity. About standing up when everyone else had been made too afraid to. So when Marina finally said, "Are there any questions?" with that smug little smile that suggested she thought she'd won already, I stood up. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone even and professional, "I do have a few." Every head in the room turned. Marina's smile faltered slightly. I held up my folder. "Could you show everyone here the documentation proving that you're the elected HOA president? Perhaps the meeting minutes from the last election? The vote tallies? Signatures?" The silence was immediate. Thick. Uncomfortable. I swear, you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Marina blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She forced a thin smile. "The election records are maintained by the community secretary," she said after a pause, her voice losing a bit of its practiced smoothness. "I don't carry them to every meeting." "Interesting," I replied, stepping forward. "Because according to county records, there is no community secretary. In fact, I flipped open the folder, pulling out the top document, there's no active HOA board at all. Pine Lakes Homeowners Association was officially dissolved in December of 2021. The projector she had so graciously set up for her dramatic PowerPoint became the perfect weapon. I connected my laptop, and the county dissolution certificate appeared on the screen, large and undeniable. Gasps. Murmurs. A man dropped his coffee cup. This, I said, pointing to the seal and signature, is the official termination document. There have been no elections, no board meetings, and no legal authority to enforce anything for over 2 years. And then, like dominoes falling, I began unveiling the rest: bank statements, printouts, line items showing $63,000 in dues Marina had collected since the HOA's dissolution. The atmosphere in the room changed in an instant. The fear dissolved, replaced by something else: anger. Betrayal. A tall man in the back stood up, voice trembling with rage. "You fined me for painting my fence the same color it's been since 2003. You made me afraid to mow my damn lawn." An older woman stood slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "You told me the $3,000 I gave was for road repairs and new lights," she said, voice breaking. "That was my emergency fund." And the stories poured out. One after another. People who had been threatened, fined, intimidated. Elderly residents, single parents, veterans. Marina hadn't protected the neighborhood, she had preyed on it. She tried to fight back, of course. Claimed the documents were forgeries. Shouted that she'd protected everyone. Then finally, voice cracking, she let the mask slip. "My husband always said I was good at organizing people," she sobbed. "Since he died, this community was all I had left." It was heartbreakingly human. But it didn't undo the harm. Her grief had metastasized into control. And now, stripped of her authority, Marina was spiraling. We thought that would be the end. We were wrong. The very next morning, the first signs of retaliation appeared. Flower beds destroyed. Mailboxes smashed. Wind chimes ripped down. Each act targeted those who'd spoken out. The neighborhood hadn't seen the last of Marina. And in that moment, as I stood beside Emma staring at the ruins of the old woman's once beautiful garden, I realized something chilling. This wasn't over. This was war. I couldn't tell at first whether the silence was grief or fear. But the message it delivered was unmistakable. This is what happens when you challenge authority. The neighborhood had grown quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Lawns remained uncut, children no longer played outside, and neighbors who used to wave with coffee cups in hand now avoided eye contact. The tension in the air wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. It lingered on porches and between property lines, hanging over fences like an invisible electric fence. What had started as a disagreement over community rules had spiraled into something far more sinister, something darker. And then Marina made her boldest, most dangerous move. She came for my daughter. It was a Thursday morning, and I was working from home. The house was quiet except for the occasional hum of my laptop and the clinking of Emma's toys as she played in the backyard. I had just taken a sip of coffee, enjoying the peaceful moment, when I heard a sound that instantly turned my blood cold. It wasn't a playful shout or a cry of frustration. It was a scream, raw, piercing, and laced with pure terror. "Emma." I dropped my mug. It shattered against the kitchen floor, spraying hot coffee and ceramic shards in every direction, but I didn't stop to notice. I ran. Out the back door and into the yard. I found a scene I'll never forget for as long as I live. Marina stood over my 6-year-old daughter, her body rigid, finger pointed inches from Emma's face. Her voice, sharp and shrill, was raised in furious condemnation. "Your slide is a safety hazard and it needs to be removed immediately," she barked, looming like a storm cloud over my trembling child. Emma, backed up against the wooden fence, was crying so hard her little body shook with each breath. "Bad things happen to children who don't listen to adults and follow community standards," Marina added, her voice low and venomous. I froze for a split second, long enough to take in the madness playing out before me. Then my instincts kicked in, and all I could feel was fury. My daughter. My child. My blood boiled faster than my brain could catch up. No one talks to my daughter like that. Not now. Not ever. When I charged into the yard, Marina turned to face me. Her eyes were wild, red-rimmed, her face twisted with something between desperation and rage. She hissed, "This child is going to get hurt if you don't teach her to respect authority." At that exact moment, our next-door neighbor, Alex, pulled into his driveway. He stepped out of his car and saw the scene unfold. His keys dangled in his hand, but the look on his face said it all: shock, disbelief, and concern. He didn't know if he should intervene or call for help, but to his credit, he didn't walk away. That incident was the final straw for me. As a father, I'd tolerated a lot up until that point: passive-aggressive notes, fake HOA letters, intimidation tactics. But this? Threatening a 6-year-old? This crossed a line so bright and so loud, it might as well have been drawn in flames. It was also the moment I realized something much more troubling. Marina was no longer just a control freak. She was completely untethered from reality. Her grief, once a reason for sympathy, had curdled into something unstable and dangerous. Emma was traumatized. She refused to go outside for the rest of the week, retreating into herself like a shadow of the bright, spirited girl she used to be. She kept asking heartbreaking questions. Are we going to have to move? Is the mean lady going to hurt our family? Did I do something wrong by playing on my slide? When she quietly asked, is it my fault she's mad again? I couldn't answer right away. My throat tightened. Instead, I began packing her things for a weekend trip to her grandparents' house. She didn't cry. She just nodded and gathered her teddy bear. That moment, watching my joyful daughter become afraid in her own backyard, was the moment I truly broke inside. And it was also the moment my resolve hardened into steel. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This wasn't about fake leadership or phony fines. This was about protecting my daughter and every other child in our neighborhood from a person whose obsession with power had become a threat to their safety. Throughout that week, Marina's behavior grew more erratic. Sleep-deprived and paranoid, she started patrolling the neighborhood at night, flashlight in hand, clipboard tucked under her arm like she was conducting a military inspection. Residents spotted her at 2 a.m. walking the sidewalks, taking photos of houses and writing notes. It was like watching a neighborhood morph into a police state under one unhinged woman's rule. She began filing false reports with city services, noise complaints, sanitation violations, building code infractions, weaponizing bureaucracy to harass the people she once claimed to protect. It was a scorched earth strategy, make life so miserable that neighbors would beg her to resume her self-appointed leadership just to make the madness stop. But it wasn't working. People were getting angry, not submissive. They started installing doorbell cameras, not expensive ones, just cheap units from discount websites. Porch lights stayed on all night. Children were no longer allowed to play unsupervised, not because of crime, but because of Marina. The fear wasn't about outsiders, it was about one of our own. Rachel and I became the informal resistance coordinators. People came to us with stories, some infuriating, some heartbreaking. An elderly couple had been threatened with legal action over the color of their doormat. A single mom with toddlers was told her kids were too loud to play outside during the day. Rachel's own son, just 8 years old, had nightmares about the mean lady, refusing to ride his bike outside. Each family had their own Marina horror story, and the psychological toll she was inflicting on neighborhood children had become impossible to ignore. The community was fracturing. Some neighbors talked of moving. Others whispered about confronting Marina more directly. But everyone was waiting for the next incident, walking on eggshells and wondering when they'd be next. By Friday, it became clear Marina was planning a final act. Several neighbors saw her loading boxes into her car, clearing out her garage. But she wasn't retreating quietly. She was going out with venom. She spray-painted traitors in red across Rachel's garage door, the lettering thick and jagged, almost designed to resemble something violent. She left dead flowers on the elderly couple's doorstep with a note that read, "This is what happens to communities without proper leadership." And then she left me a voicemail. Her voice was unhinged, breathless, trembling with rage. "You think you've won something," she said, "but you have no idea what you've unleashed. Without proper authority, this place will become chaos. Chaos destroys families. Your daughter will learn what happens when there are no rules." That weekend, I sent Emma to her grandparents' house. Not out of cowardice, but for her safety and peace. She deserved to feel safe in her skin, not scared in her swing set. I contacted the police again, reporting the harassment and property damage. They listened but offered little help beyond formal reports. Until she actually breaks a serious law, they said, "Our hands are tied." It wasn't enough. A restraining order could take weeks. And we might not have weeks. Marina was a powder keg waiting to blow, and the whole neighborhood was her fuse. When she stood in the empty community center that Saturday evening, screaming at residents who had already walked out on her, "If you won't let me protect you, then you deserve what's coming," I knew we were past the point of no return. A person who's lost power, purpose, and the illusion of control sometimes decides to take everyone down with them. I knew I needed answers. So I began to dig. Using my skills as a software developer and with help from Rachel, who had access to background databases through her hospital contacts, we traced Marina's past. What we uncovered was worse than we ever imagined. This wasn't her first act as a fake HOA dictator. Marina, it turned out, was a serial fraudster. A professional manipulator. A grifter with a binder of aliases and a blueprint for community domination. The first major clue came from a 2020 news article about Meadowbrook Village, a neighborhood 40 miles north. The headline read, HOA President Disappears After Residents Question Authority. The article included a grainy photo. There she was, Marina, but under a different name, Michelle Barrett. According to the article, Michelle had collected over $50,000 in unauthorized HOA fees before vanishing overnight when residents started asking for records. Same tactics. Same patterns. Intimidation. Fake violations. Fear-based control. Even her grieving widow backstory was a manipulation. Her husband had died in a car accident, yes, but in 2017. Years earlier than she'd claimed. One photo from Meadowbrook archives showed her holding a folded flag at a community memorial. Her grief had been real. But what she did with it afterward? That was something far more dangerous. She used her tragedy to construct a mask. A cover story. And behind it, she built an empire of fear, one neighborhood at a time. And now she had brought it here, to us. But not for much longer. Even after everything we'd already uncovered, fake violation letters, unauthorized fines, harassing behavior, what I learned next turned the knot in my stomach into something darker, more urgent. It wasn't just that Marina had been manipulating Pine Lake residents through fear and deception. It wasn't even that she'd stolen $63,000 from our neighbors. It was that this wasn't her first time. This wasn't her first community. She'd done it before. And based on everything I'd found, she was getting ready to do it again. The life insurance payout from her husband's death had been $200,000. A sizable sum. Enough to help anyone start over, to rebuild. But she had blown through it, every last dollar. Not due to misfortune, grief-driven generosity, or some tragic mishap. No, Marina had simply burned through it and then turned to a new method of income, community-level fraud. Carefully planned, ruthlessly executed. This wasn't a grieving widow losing her way. This was something else entirely. She had discovered that by masquerading as an HOA figurehead, using just enough real-sounding terminology, just enough fake paperwork, just enough intimidation, she could extract money from terrified homeowners without anyone suspecting the truth until it was too late. Following a few threads from local message boards, I stumbled across references to a woman named Michelle Barrett in a neighborhood called Meadowbrook Village, just 2 hours away. I reached out to a few of the people who had posted warnings about her. What followed were hours of heart-wrenching, horrifying phone calls with Meadowbrook residents. People who'd lived through the exact same nightmare we were now facing in Pine Lake. The playbook was identical. The escalation, the tactics, the fear, it was all the same. It always began quietly, with Marina establishing herself as a concerned resident with deep ties to property values and community standards. Then she'd create fake violation notices, parking infractions, unapproved lawn decorations, minor fence repairs. All accompanied by threats of fines or legal action. She'd collect money through fabricated channels, even creating mock board letters and financial records. When challenged, she escalated, personal threats, vandalism, aggressive late-night visits. And finally, when cornered, she retaliated with venom. Jennifer Walsh, a mother of 2 from Meadowbrook, became a key contact. Her story shook me. She gets really dangerous when she's cornered, she warned during our first conversation. Jennifer recounted the last month Marina was active in their neighborhood, her voice trembling as she spoke. Property was vandalized nightly. Child Protective Services received multiple false reports accusing parents of neglect, every accusation targeting families that had pushed back against her. There were direct threats against children, messages left on doorsteps, even letters implying families could lose their homes. My daughter once drew stars on our mailbox with washable markers, Jennifer said, voice brittle with memory. The next morning, Marina knocked on our door. She looked at my daughter and said, "Kids who misbehave in good communities don't get to stay." That night, my girl cried herself to sleep. She was 5. Jennifer's voice cracked then, the trauma raw even after all this time. We sold our house at a loss just to get away. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about protecting our family. We only realized the extent of the fraud later. She'd taken over $50,000 from our neighbors before she vanished. That was the final, chilling parallel. As soon as pressure mounted, Marina would list her house, liquidate whatever assets she could, and disappear before law enforcement could catch up. Then she'd reappear in a new neighborhood, under a different name, like a wolf changing coats, and begin again. Her total take between Meadowbrook and Pine Lake was now estimated at $115,000, though based on how long she had been operating, the true number could be higher. Maybe much higher. This wasn't a neighborhood drama anymore. Emma and I had stumbled into something larger than either of us could have imagined, a serial predator, preying on trusting communities, using the structure of HOAs and the fear of fines to line her pockets. We weren't just trying to stop a scam. We were trying to prevent a cycle of trauma from repeating itself, again and again. And then came the most alarming discovery of all. Marina had already listed her house for sale. It was classic Marina, textbook. Just like in Meadowbrook, she was preparing her exit. Packing up, preparing to vanish, leaving confusion and damage in her wake. She'd already stolen $63,000 from Pine Lake. That money was gone. But what she hadn't yet done, what we feared she would do, was enter the revenge phase. The final stage, according to Jennifer and other Meadowbrook residents. The moment where Marina, knowing her time was up, tried to inflict the most damage possible before leaving. I couldn't let that happen. None of us could. So I decided to act. We didn't have the luxury of waiting for lawyers or city bureaucrats to catch up. Marina had a head start, and we needed to catch her in the act before she escaped to victimize yet another group of families. I organized one final community meeting, not for debate or negotiation, but for exposure. This wasn't a town hall. This was a trial. The goal, to present the complete, irrefutable evidence of Marina's fraud. Not just to the Pine Lake residents, but to law enforcement, local media, and the very people she'd hurt in her previous life. Rachel helped coordinate logistics, along with Jennifer and the other Meadowbrook families. We printed every fake HOA letter, every forged fee document, every piece of proof. This time, the community center wasn't filled with fear. It buzzed with resolve. There was no podium, no false hierarchy. Just folding chairs, stacks of paper, and people who had finally had enough. Marina arrived in what appeared to be a brand new business suit. She still carried her clipboard and camera, as if by holding them tightly enough, she could conjure back the illusion of power. She walked in like she was still in charge. But the room didn't quiet in fear, it stared back in contempt. The tremor in her hands betrayed the panic behind her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, tone as haughty as ever. "I've called this meeting to address the malicious lies being spread about our community leadership." I stood up. Calm. Firm. Holding a thick binder of documents in one hand and surrounded by the Meadowbrook families. "Marina," I said, my voice echoing in the hushed room, "could you explain to everyone why you used the name Michelle Barrett when you ran the same HOA scam at Meadowbrook Village?" Dead silence. Her face drained of color, then flushed bright red, then pale again. Her lips parted but no words came. Because seated in the third row were the very people she had lied to, stolen from, and emotionally traumatized years ago. Her past had come to confront her present. "Could you also explain," I continued, flipping open a copy of her husband's death certificate, "why you claimed your husband recently died when, in fact, he passed away in 2017? And why you collected over $50,000 in fake HOA dues from Meadowbrook families before fleeing in the middle of the night?" An older woman in the front row gasped audibly. "You mean I called you Michelle for 2 years?" Her voice trembled, thick with betrayal. "You sat in my kitchen. I told you about my husband's cancer. You prayed with me." The raw pain on her face was unbearable. This wasn't about stolen money. This was about stolen trust. Then Jennifer stood. She turned toward the Pine Lake residents, her voice shaking but powerful. "This woman terrorized our community for 18 months. She used the exact same playbook, fake violation notices, threats about property values, intimidation. When we pushed back, she retaliated. We were terrified. She threatened our kids. She tried to destroy us." And one by one, the Meadowbrook families rose to echo her story. Each account revealed another layer of calculated cruelty. Another family betrayed. Another child frightened. Another neighbor used. Pine Lake residents listened in stunned silence, realizing these weren't isolated events. This was their future, our future, had we not acted. The pattern wasn't just similar. It was identical. I laid out the documents on the center table. Bank records. Handwriting matches. Fake HOA forms from both communities. A timeline. A witness list. It was all there. Every thread, every lie, every dollar. Marina stood frozen, silent, clutching that clipboard like it could shield her from the truth now filling the room. This wasn't just justice. This was a reckoning. And it was long overdue. County records were the first piece of the puzzle to fall into place. They showed, in black and white legal clarity, that the HOA marina had used to rule Pine Lake with an iron fist no longer existed, hadn't, in fact, for several years. It had been formally dissolved and decommissioned due to lack of legal renewal and oversight. That meant every fine, every citation, every threat she had issued carried no legitimate authority. She had been operating under the guise of power she no longer held, using outdated letterheads, reproposed bylaw documents, and community fear to maintain her illusion of control. But once that illusion cracked, it crumbled quickly. What followed was a wave of evidence like nothing the county investigators had seen in years. A banker-turned-resident came forward with records that exposed Marina's theft, over $63,000 siphoned from Pine Lake homeowners through fraudulent dues and made-up fines. Every penny had been directed into a private account she managed under the name Community Enrichment Fund. A nice name for a scam. The funds were long spent, used not on neighborhood beautification or communal events, but on luxury handbags, spa treatments, and extravagant home decor. The bank logs were indisputable. Then came the real bombshell. A retired attorney named Ellen, who had only moved to Pine Lake 3 months earlier, recognized Marina from her days living in Meadowbrook, a community over 2 hours away. She swore it was the same woman, but under a different name. She'd gone by Janice Weller there and had pulled off an eerily similar scam. Falsified documents. Harassment of families. Fake citations. A broken swing set that she claimed violated aesthetic harmony regulations. The resemblance wasn't just in the actions, it was in the tactics, the language, the obsession with control. And now, with documentation of that previous case in hand, her pattern became undeniable. Photos surfaced, grainy cell phone shots from angry residents, showing the damage Marina had caused in her final weeks of retaliation. She had vandalized yards under the cover of night, uprooted gardens, torn down children's play equipment, and spray-painted unapproved across fence panels and sheds. All in a desperate attempt to reassert the control that was slipping through her fingers. But perhaps the most damning evidence came in the form of voice recordings. An anonymous neighbor, fearing Marina's wrath but unwilling to let her get away with threats, had begun recording interactions. One clip had her clearly threatening a young boy who had dared ride his bike across the community greenbelt, warning him she would make sure your family regrets this unless you follow the rules. In another, she declared she would drive every one of you out of this neighborhood if it's the last thing I do. These were not the actions of a concerned neighbor. These were the rantings of a tyrant. When the police arrived, they didn't come quietly. A coordinated effort had been planned between the sheriff's department and county prosecutors. 2 squad cars, followed by an unmarked vehicle, rolled into Pine Lake just as the evidence was being laid bare at the emergency town meeting. Residents gathered outside the clubhouse, their eyes fixed on the doors, their breaths held in anticipation. Marina stood at the front of the room with her ever-present clipboard, flipping papers and mumbling to herself about how none of this would hold up. Then the officers entered. There was no dramatic resistance. No shouting. No bolting for the door. Marina simply looked up at the officers, blinked, and stared at her clipboard like it had betrayed her. Her lips parted, perhaps to deliver one of her infamous lectures on compliance or standards, but no words came. The cuffs clicked into place, echoing through the stunned silence of the room. She was charged with fraud, theft, extortion, tax evasion, harassment, and making threats against minors. Her walk of shame through the clubhouse was witnessed by every family she had tormented. And as she passed by us, her face twisted into a final sneer. "You've destroyed the only order these families will ever have," she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. But if she had looked behind her, she would have seen children laughing. Neighbors embracing. A community no longer afraid. From that moment forward, Marina's made-up rules were voided. Every absurd restriction, banning chalk drawings on sidewalks, forbidding birthday banners, threatening fines for unsightly Halloween decorations, died with her authority. People began organizing. Not just to reclaim their stolen money through restitution, but to reclaim their lives. Rachel, who had lived under Marina's scrutiny for years, broke down in tears, not out of sorrow, but sheer relief. "It's over," she kept whispering. "It's really over." She hugged her neighbors, many of whom she hadn't spoken to beyond forced greetings, and spoke excitedly about finally planting the flowers she loved. "Sunflowers, marigolds, maybe even wild roses," she said, eyes bright. Kids began venturing out of their homes again. Slowly at first, testing the boundaries. Riding their bikes. Playing tag. Drawing dragons and castles in colored chalk. The sound of a basketball bouncing in a driveway became the unofficial signal of freedom. It was like someone had unmuted the neighborhood. As for me, I walked home under the warm hues of sunset, pink and orange streaks painting the sky. Emma's slide was still there, sun-faded and slightly wobbly, but now it stood like a monument. A reminder of what we had fought for. The simple right of a child to be a child. That night, Emma brushed her teeth, clutched her stuffed giraffe, and asked, "Are we safe now?" I looked out the window at our quiet, peaceful street. Then back at her. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We made it safe again." Marina's trial was swift. The judge didn't hold back. In court, her manipulation and cruelty were laid bare. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation, during which she was banned from participating in any HOA or community organization. Her criminal record would forever bar her from positions of authority. She was ordered to repay $115,000 to families from both Pine Lake and Meadowbrook, with her home seized and sold to begin restitution. The judge called her actions an unconscionable abuse of public trust that weaponized motherhood and neighborly civility. And the changes didn't stop there. Without her oppressive presence, Pine Lake bloomed. Literally and figuratively. The elderly woman down the road planted a garden that became a local attraction, rows of tulips, sunflowers, and wildflowers of every color. The young couple built a tree swing. Block parties returned. Kids laughed freely again. Emma took a bit longer to heal. For weeks, she still flinched when someone raised their voice. Still looked over her shoulder when playing outside. But slowly, her confidence returned. She began inviting kids over. Our yard transformed into the heart of the neighborhood, filled with shrieks of laughter and the occasional spilled juice box. Rachel became my closest friend. A single mother and night shift nurse, she had endured Marina's wrath more than most. But she never backed down. Her records were instrumental in exposing Marina's crimes. Her son and Emma became inseparable, building forts, biking around the pond, playing hopscotch on the same pavement Marina had once tried to police. The story spread beyond our block. Reporters picked it up. Our case became the basis for a new county task force on HOA fraud, which identified and prosecuted multiple other scams. A state senator pushed for legislation requiring criminal background checks and identity verification for anyone starting or running an HOA. Pine Lake had become a beacon, not just of justice, but of resilience. Looking back now, the most shocking thing isn't how evil Marina was. It's how close she came to getting away with it. She counted on silence. On fear. On shame. But the second she threatened my daughter, she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I had no special skills, just a laptop, a printer, and the stubborn belief that something was wrong. In the end, it wasn't lawyers or guns or loud protests that took her down. It was a $50 plastic slide. And a dad who refused to look away. Weeks later, Emma and her friends painted a sign and hung it over the tree near the slide. It read, in bright, clumsy letters, "Neighborhood Fun Zone." No one tore it down. Because community isn't built on fear. It's built on kindness. On kids playing freely. On the sound of laughter returning after a long silence. And that's how we ended a fraud that stole 6 figures, and gave our neighborhood its soul back. The end.